vast water. When we see it, we think of pure, unspoiled nature. But when the settlers of the 1800s saw it, they saw a power source, and they thought of a business, livelihood, and industry. They quarried and hauled stone. They built dams and erected mills on foundations like this, on streams all across the eastern half of this new land. This is Turkey Creek in west central Georgia. It runs through the heart of Salem community. From the 1830s through World War II, Salem was a sprawling commercial and agricultural community. Farms large and small, schools, churches, stores, cotton gins, grist mills, and textile mills. In the mid-1800s and later, one could find a surprising number and kind of water-powered industries around Salem. About 5 miles up the stream was the Dunlop Mill, later known as the Butts Mill. It was a grist mill, grinding corn into meal for local farmers. They used it for cornbread, the southern staple of every meal, every day. About 2.5 miles this way was another grist mill, a sawmill, and a water-powered cotton gin. That was the Allen Davidson Mill. Sometime after it was washed away, it was reestablished as the Pruitt Mill. Right up the stream, in 1840, planter John A. Smith built his mill. Later it was known as the Purdue Mill. This is a mystery. One old gentleman told me it was a cotton gin. Nobody else even knows it's out here. Half-mile downstream, Scotsman Robert Robertson built his woolen mill. And just beyond that, on Flat Shoals Creek, the O'Neill brothers built a sawmill, a grist mill, warehouses, stables, store, post office, owners' houses, millers' houses, the village of O'Neill's Mills, Georgia. Oh, and on Polecat Creek was another grist mill and cotton gin. Travelers in the 1800s rarely mentioned the mills in their writing. Mills were small businesses littering the waterways, as common and unremarkable as modern-day convenience stores. Today, they're almost all gone. Of most, if anything remains, it's only a bit of foundation. But here on Turkey Creek, around Old Salem, there are a few derelicts remaining. Here, in 1840, planter John Smith built his mill. Smith owned 2,000 acres around here. He planted cotton, loaned his neighbors money at reasonable rates, and ran this grist and flour mill for the local clientele. This was a traditional mill building. Corn was ground on the first floor. Upstairs was a roller mill to make wheat flour. The wheel at the Smith mill was beneath the mill instead of beside it. That wheel was right here. The mill is right above us. In the 1920s, a local farmer and businessman named George Purdue bought the mill. And in 1928, it burned to the ground. This stonework is all that remains of the original mill. A gas engine started that fire. Millers, like farmers, are dependent on the weather. Dry spells meant low water in the mill pond. Sometimes it got so low the mill couldn't run. So the Purdues installed a gasoline engine for auxiliary power. That set the fire, and the mill burned to the ground. This is the mill George Purdue built to replace it. In 1974, it was intact and looked almost ready to run again. Since then, a gable has been burned, tin roofing has been stripped and stolen, and rain has rotted the interior. George Purdue had an ice plant down the road in Chipley, now Pine Mountain. When he built a new mill here in Salem, he included this ice plant. This brick structure was his ice house. Cork insulation kept things cool. The ice house was in here, next to the storage house. Purdue cooled his condensers here, behind the ice plant, with water from a spring. He ran cooling coils along this concrete floor and froze 300-pound blocks of ice in iron forms like this. When the forms were filled with water, they were covered with sections of oak flooring about this high. While they were cooling, compressed air was pumped in. The compressed air made the ice crystal clear. Without the air, the ice would be cloudy. The Perdues delivered ice from this plant all over Salem and beyond. They sold 50-pound blocks for 10 cents, sold 300-pound blocks to stores in the area who resold to their customers. In the years before home refrigeration, ice making was big business. The grist mill was right on the other side of this wall. Virtually all of the mill stones and grind tables in west central Georgia after the turn of the century came from R.D. Cole's shop in Noonan. This one is a combination of wood and iron construction. These gear teeth are wood. Iron on iron made a tremendous roar, but wood on iron ran quiet. These grindstones, grinding against each other, eventually wore smooth and slick. Then they quit grinding. So every few months a millwright came by to roughen the face of the stones. Pins were inserted on each side of the top stone. Then a scaffold with chain hoist raised the upper stone. It could be turned over so the millwright could get to both of the stones. He used a special hammer and chisels, which were eventually replaced with an air hammer. Farm families usually brought their corn to the mill in cotton baskets. Here it was shucked, cleaned, and shelled, then carried in tin cups on an endless belt up this elevator shaft and dumped into these bins. The rain has eaten the bins away, giving us a cutaway view so we can see their size and shape. Corn came to the grindstone from that hopper, through a wooden chute right here, and into the center of the stone. As it ground, meal worked outward through channels cut in the face of the stone and came out these grooves around the periphery. Millstones had a circular fence around them, sometimes wood, sometimes tin, that channeled the meal into this chute and then out into a meal box right here. From there it could be scooped into bags for the customers or for sale to stores here in Salem and West Point, Chipley, Hamilton, and LaGrange. In this area, perhaps 5 to 10% of a mill's clientele might be moonshiners. Typically, they brought in large amounts of corn and they wanted it ground coarse for their mash. The stones could be adjusted with a wheel that was right here. It controlled this lever, which moved the upper stone up or down for a coarser or finer grind. Mills made their money by charging a toll. That is, they took a percentage of the meal ground to be sold, along with the animal feed, which was made from the cobs and the shucks. This mill ran on water power with electricity as a backup, but the water wheel's gone. So is the dam. In fact, every mill dam on every creek in Salem is gone, blown out by a great flood in 1948. That flood filled this mill chest deep in water, tore out the dam, and all the others, sending stones large and small tumbling down the creek. And it took the water wheel. That wheel was 12 feet high, 8 feet across its face, made of iron. It was extremely heavy, but the flood washed out its concrete footing, snapped its shaft, and sent it rolling down the creek like a bicycle wheel. George Perdue built this mill out of the materials of the day. Concrete block. Doesn't fit our image of the old mill by the stream, but I know where there's one that does. It's up Turkey Creek. Let's go take a look. This is the old Dunlop Mill. From the 1930s on, it was known as the Butts Mill. The mill pond was right upstream. A wooden trough supported by this series of stone piers carried water down to the wheel. This is the wheel that powered the mill. This is an overshot wheel. The water came over the top, filled these curved steel buckets. This reduction gearing turned this shaft, which drove this pulley. A series of belts and pulleys powered everything in the mill. The belt from the pulley went straight up to that shaft, which provided power to the grindstone and, through a series of power takeoffs, to everything else inside. This hinged beam lifted this hinged beam to raise or lower the stone. At the Butts mill, we can get a better picture of the daily workings of a grist mill. A tin fence surrounded the grindstones here, channeling the meal out the chute into the meal bin. This is a scaffold. It carried the chain hoist that lifted the grindstone when the millwright came by. And this is the chute that carried the grain from the bin to the grindstone. This is their elevator with a continuous loop belt that went down this shaft, scooped the corn, and went up this shaft. Let's see where it went. This wooden wheel and axle, powered by a belt, drove the elevator. It brought the corn up and dumped it into this cleaning chute. From there it went into the bin and was ready to go onto the grindstone. This fan blew air up the chute, blowing this shaft off the corn. At Butts Mill, as at Purdue's mill, nothing was wasted. Shucks and stalks were stripped from ears, and they, along with the cobs, went through the hammer mill to make feed for cattle and mules. There was nothing glamorous or romantic about a miller's life. There was a need to be filled and a job to be done. Of all the water-powered industry in Salem, only the Butts Mill and Purdue Mill remain. Davidson's mill is gone, Pruitt's mill is gone, Robertson's woolen mill is gone, all the cotton gins are gone, and the entire village of O'Neill's mills is gone without a trace. Salem School and churches remain, but its thriving commerce, its mills, stores, gins, its farm families and homes, they're of another time, victim of the automobile, the growth of industry, the lure of the city. Life moves on, and the old mills, relics of the past.